So we're going to do this video on sidechaining. Some basic step-by-step on how to set up an effective sidechain. When I heard about things like this, and anytime I learned something from someone that knew more than me, it was this matter of I would sometimes really understand what they were talking about and why in concept or in theory. But some of the basic stuff, maybe when I was younger and a little too nervous to ask. I work in Pro Tools. I've noticed some of the other DAWs make it real simple. If you pick something you want to sidechain from, they'll just be like, it'll show you the name of the track, and it's like a one-step process. Now, what I do enjoy about Pro Tools, and it's not necessarily for everyone, is how it still mirrors a in-studio experience where you are making decisions on how you want to route, and you have a little more control. But with that comes a few little details of organization to make it easier. I'm going to use this as an example song. Some of the sidechain options or places we could do a sidechain would be when using a certain compression, gate, and dynamic EQs. It doesn't mean that there's not other places to sidechain. It's just that those three are biggies, especially when it comes to when you're in a mix and you're kind of the near end of a project. You could do subtle, you could do really extreme things with it, but you definitely could do subtle things to help pull a mix together with compression, gating, or sidechaining a dynamic EQ, which I find to be one of the more exciting ones. Now we're going to set up the basics to get ourselves to be able to easily sidechain. Part of it is just being familiar with Pro Tools enough. Ultimately, when you're sidechaining, you're putting a certain effect, for example, a compressor, a gate, or maybe a dynamic EQ that has a key input. I will show you one now, just real quick. So I have one here. So we're going to look for this. Interesting. This is going to be an alternate video in to use Rosetta or not, because my Waves EQs are not present. Oh boy. Oh, that kind of ruins the fun. Let's reopen Pro Tools. So, we're using Pro Tools on a new computer, silicone chip. Some of the plugins aren't compatible yet. So Pro Tools has a feature where in a lot of the plugins and a lot of what goes on in Pro Tools can work in this new computer format. However, some can't. I probably need to go check if I have to update my Waves plugins to be allowable, but we're not going to do that in this video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close Pro Tools. We're going to quit it. A nice segue into video to break into some of the other stuff that goes on with Pro Tools, just basic usage when we're using, say, a brand newish or a year-old Mac to take full advantage of I guess it's the silicone chip, don't quote me on it, whatever these things have under the hood. Some of the plugins may not work or may not have been updated yet. And and you'll see it, I'll show you because I filmed it, going into applications folder, right-clicking on Pro Tools. I said Get Info, and then there's a little selection you can make where you could say Open with Rosetta. Rosetta, I guess they named it after the famous Rosetta Stone and its ability to translate. By turning that on, I think it helps translate certain plugin coding to work in this newer format. So I know it doesn't run as fast, which it's not always obvious, but until all the plugins are either updated by the manufacturers, or I think in my case it was a Waves plugin that I probably need to do the update so it works, because we're going to be using this plugin a lot. I love this plugin and it's worth it for me to do that. So we're now out of Rosetta, so we're kind of at the beginning. We're in a session. We want to apply a sidechain, and again, with sidechaining, we all have probably different understanding of what sidechaining is. In quick basic description, if I have a plugin like a dynamic EQ, which the EQ will pull frequencies based upon the audio source. If I put it just on the drums, I can have it where it responds to the movement of the drums to pull those frequencies. Maybe we'll open a compressor right now, just so we're not just tackling dynamic EQ in all of its glory and understanding. We'll get a basic compressor. In these cases, with all these options, I still like using the one that comes with Pro Tools. When I'm doing a sidechain compressor, it's usually for just some transparent pushing of things. I know it's not the proper term, like compression. We're pushing, but we're kind of squeezing. We're kind of moving the bottom to the top and the top, ceiling to floor, however we want to look at it. So correction, it's actually not the built-in Pro Tools compressor I've been using. It's actually from Waves. It's the C1. I've been using it so long, and a lot of those early Waves plugins blended in so well into how Pro Tools looked. I almost never even realized it. So yeah, my bad. I do believe there's actually a lot of great plugins that come with Pro Tools, and I do use a lot of the stuff that's built into the old Digi-Rack. But in this particular case, it is the Waves C1 compressor that I just love for super basic, easy, straight up sidechaining application for compression. So yeah, that's it. My oops. It's very simple to use. It doesn't take up a lot of CPU power. It does the job. And it has a sidechain input. Now, a lot of plugin companies have them. Some don't. I see it more and more. I realize Universal Audio, by having their non-UAD chip-dependent version of their plugins, like I guess it's the UADX or UAX, they added the sidechain key. I haven't even gone there yet, and I'm excited to mess with that. But for basics, you'll see a plugin, and again, I'm a Pro Tools user. This is where most of my experience is. I don't know if this applies to everything. I think some of it will. If it doesn't, and you happen to know how to be the Rosetta of this, or basically translate, feel free to do it in the comments, or if you're really passionate about the translation, maybe we could do a video together. Key input. So the key input, knowing there's a key input there, that is the basics of what the sidechaining needs to happen. So what has to happen is, if I put this compressor just on the drums, smile pretty for the camera, smile pretty for the camera. Right now we're listening to my friend Parker Kindred, Slay a Groove. So if we just put compressor on the drums as is, we could do things. We could compress it. We could do what we may want compressors to do. Do a fast attack, slightly fast release. The more we compress, and we hear compression. Great. So we know what the compressor would do based upon the compressor responding to the information of the actual audio that we're listening to. Now, what sidechaining is applying what we just did, having a compression setting and having the drum audio affected by that compression. However, the compressor would actually respond to audio from somewhere else. We would send our audio from a different track. And in studios, and in the olden days, or a long time ago, or not that long ago because I've seen it done, it would be a patch. We would basically patch out of an output of, say, the console, and maybe we want the drums compression to respond to the bass performance. These are all kind of hypotheticals. I'm not saying this is the exact things we would sidechain. We would run an aux or an out or a send, depending on what language we're using or how our DAW breaks it down. From this bass performance, we would patch it into the sidechain input on a compressor. Then we would actually run the audio from the drums through that same compressor. So when we press play or playback, the bass's performance, the movement of the bass, its dynamics or how it's played will hit the compressor. The compressor will engage. It'll do what it needs to do, whatever we set. If we have a fast attack, it will quickly attack and whatever we need it to do, but it'll be doing it to the drums audio. So the drums audio is passing through the compressor, and then the audio information to have the compressor respond is coming from somewhere else, and we use the example, the bass, by routing it through a send or an aux into the sidechain input of the compression. We would take audio from the bass and send it there. And that's how we probably use a patch bay or run a cable, or many ways you could do that in the analog world. In the virtual or the Pro Tools, since we are talking mainly about Pro Tools giving you this very similar experience to have that kind of control or decision or option, you would need to do a very similar thing. So Pro Tools, for plugins that can accept sidechain information, you will see a key. There are plugins that say sidechain on them, that isn't necessarily meaning it's taking sidechain information from somewhere else. That's often a selection where they may allow you in the plugin to have a sidechain response from, say, a certain frequency range. There's a lot of plugins I've seen that'll say sidechain, and then you'll have a high pass or a low pass, and you kind of hone in, and then your plugin is actually responding to a certain area of frequencies from the same audio you're working with. Very useful as well, but that's not what we're here to do. In Pro Tools, the first thing I would do is, right here we're looking at it. We have the key input. That's where we would get audio from, and we have a bus menu. In the practice of good organization and making this be a very easy part of our workflow, not too much thought required. Before we get into where the sends are, where they're coming from, and how they're showing up, let's go over to the drop-down menu titled Setup, roll down to I/O. Once we're in the I/O field, there are multiple tabs that are important to check in with, to get familiar with this. Sometimes we do have to go here and mess with things. And I could do another whole video, or I might expand upon on personalizing the I/O to our particular needs, either for tracking, for mixing, if we also happen to mix Atmos and film and all these different types of situations we'd be a part of, we could actually set templates up to fit those, so we only have what we need. If we go to other places, different studios have different inputs and output options. While setting up our side chains, we're not going to deal with the ins or the outs right now. We are going to deal with buses. In this particular case, I would take the time to name some. You can do it at the beginning of a mix, say like, I need a few side chains, let me make them. Or you could do it case by case. As soon as you feel like you need to experience side chaining, you just go here and do it. I think it's important to be that organized, mostly because one of the cool things about side chaining that I actually really enjoy is you don't only have to send one source. So if you put, say, a side chained dynamic EQ, where every time certain instruments send their information to this dynamic EQ, the frequency maybe in the overheads might be combating vocals, guitars, and a bunch of stuff. Might be just causing some sort of chaos. But when they're not in, maybe it's not as much of a problem. If I wanted a certain frequency to go away or be maintained or managed every time, say, the snare drum hit, but I want on the overheads for the frequencies that are favorable to the snare drum to go away, I would do a send from the snare drum that goes into this dynamic EQ that I would have on my overheads. As I'm listening, and I realize, maybe if I just tap in a little bit of the vocal. So when the vocal really needs to be heard and pushing forward maybe a tad, every time the vocal hits, it hits the same dynamic EQ, which pushes those frequencies out of the way that are favorable to the vocal. It might be the same frequency that the snare drum needs. It might not be. Because I'm not sure if all dynamic EQs work like this. I know the ones that I've chosen and the one I really like, which is the Waves F6, you could actually set the side chain. The same side chain input could hit different frequencies, and you could choose to do that or not. This is why being organized helps, because you could send from multiple sends, from a vocal, from a guitar, from a drum, or anywhere, to the same sidechain input, essentially affecting that effect to respond to any of those frequencies. That's why naming it helps. So if we were just like opening up a lot of different compressors and gates and dynamic EQs to sidechain, which isn't only exclusive to those, but for the sake of this video and how this could help in the mix, these seems to be the main ones. And we just start randomly picking numbers like, 3 through 13, we're going to have to start remembering or looking back. Quick flow, got to keep on moving. Matthew Wilder? Anyone? We could either pick ones that are here. Now, the other thing to think about with the sidechain, buses, which is the word that's used in Pro Tools. Busing is the broad terminology for when we do this stuff. We're busing from one place to another. I think on early consoles that started involving the ability to route your busing within the console. I'm not positive if Neve did it first or SSL. I wasn't there that far back in the late 70s in studios. I was alive, though. In the early 80s, I was singing along to Matthew Wilder. The sidechain send, where the audio will come from, is going to be a mono bus. In Pro Tools, you would immediately go down here and flip your menu down and start working with mono paths. If you didn't want to name these right out of the gate, the ones that are here, and just make freshies or fresh ones that don't affect the ones Pro Tools laid out for you, you could go that route. And then if you don't need these, you get rid of them. I don't know how many pathways, as they call it, you can make in Pro Tools, but it's a lot. We're going to do a new path, and we're going to do a mono. This is where we get to name it. Another thing to think about, this whole naming thing is what works best for you. I might enjoy doing things like Sidechain 1 comp, and then have a few of these ready. Because the thing is, you can have this in your template. This could be part of a template for you. Sidechain 2 comp. You can make it more personal. You could feel that you're going to utilize this often. You could say Sidechain 1 comp drums. It doesn't really matter. It's what works best for you. But the key is these are mono paths. And I'll do SC3, and we could do, I think that is the understood abbreviation for anything dynamic, DYN. And we could do Sidechain 4, well, not money sign. 4 could be a gate, if we want. If you want to have these predetermined, Sidechain 5, and we could have other, if that makes you happy. I don't know. We're just going to do it so you can see how it looks. We're going to create. So remember, we're in the bus section of the I/O setup, and we're creating brand new paths for our sidechain. And the reason we do this, we could make it part of our template, which that means it'll always be there for us. So let's route it. Now we could either route the drums with the bass's input or vice versa. We'll use compression for now. This wouldn't be my actual choice of what to do with this. I would probably work more with a dynamic EQ at first, but a little sidechain compression going from bass to drums sometimes aids in the glue. The bass is sometimes it's got more of a woofy tone or a thicker tone, or even though you hit the note, it might hang out longer than, say, a kick drum. And if you have a thumpy, fun, soul, like Motown sounding bass, which I tend to love those sounds, you'll feel it might glue together a little better. One way we could do that is we could actually take this compressor here that I have on the drums. I'm going to move it to the bass. I'm going to get rid of the EQ for now. I'm getting rid of anything that might not be part of this example. And I'm going to deactivate this for now, just so we can see what's going on. This compressor is now on a bass performance. I'll solo that out so we can hear it. This is a song I did with a dear friend of mine, Bobby Leday. It's going to be mixed soon, I hope. There's a lot of amazing people who are part of it so far. So we have this fun, kind of classic bass. There it is by itself. So let's zero all this out. On this bass performance, we're going to open the compressor from the C1 compressor, and there it is. Which now I realize, after all these years, wow, that's a waves compressor. When we were watching this, we got to take back the part I said, I thought this was built into Pro Tools. I don't know what Pro Tools compressor would look like. It's fit the look of old DigiDesign vibe. But again, I love this compressor. I feel like a lot of people have it by now. I know we could probably find another built-in one in Pro Tools and do the same thing. We'll check that and get to it in a second. But let me work with what I know right now. I have this basic compressor on my bass performance, and I want the drums to create the response in this compressor and how it compresses my bass. We're going to go to the key input. We are going to go to our buses. We are going to select through our buses. Sorry, I have a camera blocking me right now. And down at the bottom is the sidechain. So we're going to do sidechain 1 comp. So now we're keeping tidy. So that's there. We can hit that little jewel and lock it over here. So we're going to start it off. We have the compressor up, and it wants the sidechain information, but it's not getting it yet. So technically, it is doing some compression. We could do a really fast attack if we want. so we really hear it. Mind you, I'm not sharing any magic with settings here. I'm literally just turning or ramping up these numbers so we could hear something for this example. So most of my examples are going to be way more aggressive. So it's working. Awesome. We do have a sidechain input engaged, but this sidechain input needs signal from somewhere else. We're going to take it from the drums. This is a stereo recording of the drums. These drums were recorded minimal mic to begin with. So for the sake of this example, we are getting the information from the whole drum performance to push around the bass. You might have a situation where you just want the kick drum to influence a track, like the bass or maybe a keyboard. What I like about this idea is with compressors sending from different parts of the drums or the entire kit on, say, a string or a thick synth that kind of creates this blanket across your recording, it will create some nice movement and dynamic in that. I also like messing with it on reverbs, sending some information from a rhythmic instrument or just like the kick drum and the vocal on a reverb send or reverb bus. It constantly keeps some movement in it. And these little things really are super helpful. Like, they sound like, why would I do all that? Why would I go through? Because it becomes subtle. You could do some really aggressive things with sidechaining, like using the gates and having things like turning on and off. It's a great way to create tremolo effects that are really in response to the feeling of, say, the hi-hat or the drums, or there's all sorts of ways that sidechaining could be utilized. But in this idea of, say, you have this big reverb going and this big full warm plate that you love the way it sounds, but you might be like, it's just kind of swallowing everything up a little bit. Maybe you could comb for some frequencies. That's one way. Maybe you could lower it a little bit. That could be something. Or maybe you could put a compressor on it and send in sidechain information from other instruments to help move and influence the way this reverb shows up. Maybe it'll go out of the way a little more based upon how hard the vocal hits. And as soon as the vocal lets go, it'll let the reverb maybe take that space in the mix. There's a lot of plugins that might do this more intuitively, but I still enjoy this, I don't want to say vintage approach, but this more hands-on approach that might have been done in a studio using actual compressors or the more, tangible versions of these things. How do we get the information to this sidechain key input? In Pro Tools, you are going to look for your sends. And just a reminder, and depending on what field you work in, if you're in this mix window and you like working here, this is here, you might get to your setup and realize you don't see anything. You don't see your sends. This is all based upon your settings. So for some reason, you're in this mix window environment, and that's my talk back. Hey, talking back, talk back. When you're over here and we're going to the bass track and we want to find sends, oh, they're not here. It's only the inserts where the plugins go. Just remember, you hover over the word insert. You could right click or double click or however you have your setup, trackpad, whatnot. And then you basically could show what you need to see. I personally like seeing all my insert options. Most of the stuff you see up right now, I kind of leave like that. I never mess with the other settings, but everybody is different, and what you need is what you need. But right now, you need inserts, or you need sends as well as your inserts. So we have our sends. If you want to do it in the edit window where a lot of people live or like to live, same thing. Hit sends. And what I actually did when I was showing the example was I shut off the inserts. So for some reason you get here and something's missing, like you can't see your sends, it is just hover over the word. And there you go. So it's like, wait a minute, I need sends. So just hover over insert. Do your double click, your right click, whatever your settings are on your trackpad to get that secondary menu, and hit and bring in these sends into your view. So that's both fields. So it's a send. A send is the same. A send in the mix window. We go to send. We hit the little guy there. We go down to bus. And that's where we find stuff. We will be sending from the drums, which is over here. We go to the bus. And if you look to your upper right on the compressor, that key input says sidechain SC1 comp. So we just go down here. We look for SC1 comp. It might be in the secondary bus menu. There we are. And there it is. We could do it that way. If we live here more, You notice this is where it is now to sends. We could just do it again, just so you can see the action. Now we have our inserts left, inserts here, then to the right or to the side we have our sends. We go to A, we haven't sent anything. So we go to our buses. Apparently this is on the second round of menus because I have a lot of random buses, which reminds me, as I said before, I need to go tidy up my IO area and make a template. We're going to choose SC1 because that's what's on the key input of the compressor. Now, some quick things just to kind of mess with. I'm in the mix phase of this. I like the sound I have. So I put the compressor at the end of my signal chain. Oops, just hit the microphone. I put the compressor at the end. I don't have much going on this bass, but I do have a little bit of an amp model. So I put the compressor after because I want the entire thing to be affected by this compression that is going to be responding to a drum performance. There's no right or wrong way to obviously do this. It depends on what your needs are. But in this phase, this is how I felt it has worked best. On my send, if we go back to the drums, I want to get this information from the drums. As we know, we have a pre-fader option. For the most part, I want the performance of the drums. I don't necessarily need what I've done to the drums to affect the compressor. In all actuality, I want the cleanest, closest to the initial transient that was recorded or the initial attack or hit. So that would be that's before I mess with compression and maybe effects on the drums. We are dealing with a 2-track stem that was, combining all the drums as is anyway. So, and this for the sake of having some sort of sound to work with, I did put a little compression on that, and I put a little reverb just because we're not in the full session right now with all the mix buses set up, because I wanted to just show these examples. Just in case you're looking, you're like, dude's got reverb directly on his drum stem. So maybe I do, but that's not what's happening. That's only for this sake, or maybe it's not. You try what you try and see if it works for you. With the pre-feature, I like putting it in pre-fader mode on my send. There might be another way to do this in Pro Tools. I'm pretty sure after experimenting, this is how I got the ability to mute hearing the channel, but still sending audio through this bus to the compressor, so I can really hear what it's doing. So I enjoy using the pre-fader on it. I don't want it to follow my drum performance in this sake. So if you did post-fader and you actually could do a follow, if you had automation going on, say, in that track, then that would affect what gets sent to whatever needs to receive sidechain information. The options are endless, might get a little confusing, but with the pre-fader feature, if I want to, because I like committing a lot, so if I create a really good feeling with, say, when we were referencing these thick string pads with all this movement, I'll basically get it going, turn it on, listen to it, check it, and I'll mute where the audio is coming from, and then I will just commit, I'll record within session to have that done, and then I don't have to worry about it anymore. And to do that, I don't want to hear what's affecting my compressors. Basic routing. I'm sending from the drums. I'm doing a pre-fader send. I'm going to set it to 0 or unity. I'm not sure if that's what that means. I'm going to set it to 0, which I believe in Pro Tools is unity, but I'm not sure if true unity is achieved through proper metering and balancing on like a standard of sorts. The drums are sending it to the bass. We're going to mute the drums. So right now we hear nothing. But you can see, if I mute this, the response of the compressor. So this fader that I'm sending from, which I will also lock on screen with us so we don't lose it, is this send here coming out of the drums, going down SC1 comp route or path that we made in our I/O into the key input of this compressor is SC1 comp. So as soon as we let it go, flying into that compressor is responding. But that compressor is living on the bass. Let's turn the bass on. That's not the bass. Sorry. Very tiny reference to a movie. And you can figure out what you want it to do. We could get really kooky with it and just beat the heck out of it. So every time those drums are being hit, they're really messing with this. And every time they let go, they let it get loud. And you can hear now we're kind of extra aggressive. It's pushing in and out almost like you have a light tremolo on it. But now let's hear it together. All right, let's try to match the gain a little bit. So we'll bypass. Let's go back to the beginning. So that's just the bass with the drums. Maybe we'll lower the drums a little bit. And then if I put the compressor on, you could say that was probably an aggressive setting, but that created an interesting response, a very rhythmic, I think a positive rhythmic thing happened during that. So you really feel each hit of the drums, and every time those drums hit, the bassist gets ducked out of the way a little bit, but since the bass lasts a little longer, in those spaces, it's pumping, it's breathing, and you're creating this kind of... And again, we're doing extreme examples here. This is not probably the most subtle thing, but just so you can hear it. Now, if you just did this in a subtle way, it definitely could create more bounce and movement and just dynamics, or pump or glue, whatever term you love. And you've completed a sidechain. So another thing we could try is, what if we send information for somewhere else? What if we feel we want to have the vocal push the bass around a little bit too? So we are going to now find our vocals. I'm not sure which is the one. Let's see this one.
Smile pretty for the camera. You can always take it with you. You'll see. It will only take a moment.
We could open the sidechain or we could drag it. I tend to drag things. I'm not sure if it's the best practice because you immediately get flooded with the previous settings. But for a bus, I don't think it's a huge issue. Just double check it. So at this point, we are basing the leader of audio that is affecting our compressor, like the source audio that's coming from somewhere else to affect the compressor that's actually compressing bass, is the drums. We like what the drums are doing for the most part. But now, if we feel we want to add in some response from this vocal, so we're going to mute things again. We know the drums are doing that. And if we start pushing, you feel it already, or you hear it, it's pushing it down. So we're just no vocal send, adding vocal send. And it's really pushing it around. So now we can just bring the vocal down a little bit in its send. That's no vocal send. Adding back to vocal send. Vocals aren't loud there. So we realize it's not affecting it as much. And it might not need it. But as soon as it starts hitting again. So now let's just try to hear this whole party together. So we have the drums. Go back to the beginning.
Smile pretty for the camera. You can always take it with you. You'll see. It will only take a moment of your time.
Right now, I'll mute it.
It may be all that we ever
Back on. You can hear now the bass is almost getting pushed out of the way too much. And now the bass is there. And now it's just finding a little bit of this dance.
And we can see all of the things that we miss. I can't resist you. The way that you shake it.
There you have it. That is two different audio sources, or audio sends. It's basically two different sources of audio, sending their information to a compressor that is on the bass. We're utilizing the sidechain routing that is easy to do, or is the way we need to do it in Pro Tools in general. We have sidechain compression. We're getting more into the basics of how to get a sidechain set up. Let's also figure out why we would use dynamic EQ as a sidechain. Let's analyze our drums and bass. In this case, I'm going to put the EQ on the end of both because I want the overall sound to be affected. Now, this isn't always necessary. Maybe it's done before. Again, this is just a matter of taste. The reason we're going to open 2 is we're basically trying to achieve an effect where the information coming from, say, the bass will cause the drums to push frequencies away from themselves that maybe makes the bass come through a little more that the drums might not need as much, and vice versa. Some frequencies pulled away from the bass that the drums may need, so they both could kind of lock together and be heard when needed, instead of that constant battle of raising the kick drum and raising the bass guitar. Sometimes you could just do this by bringing up 2 EQs, quickly look at it or listen to it, like analyze it if you want, or listen to it, use your ears, and you could be like, oh, I could see this kick drum really loves 100 to 115, and the bass doesn't really need it as much. The bass seems to really be responsive in, say, 85 to 95, and you naturally would cut 85 to 95 from the kick drum, cut, say, 100 to 115, these are examples, from the bass guitar, and right there you might start hearing them come through. And then maybe on the opposites, on the bass, you might boost a tad 85 to 95 if it's needed and desired, and with the kick drum as well. Another way to do that is if you feel when you do that overall where it just stays that way and you're losing those sounds, you could actually just have it done dynamically with a dynamic EQ. Basically, when the bass shows up and wants that frequency, that's when it'll go away, and vice versa. We'll start by opening up these EQ. We are going to go to the one that's designated for drums. We're going to pick a route now, since I have these old, and we'll go to our little fun routing, and we're going to do dynamic EQ. That's sidechain 3. We want this information to be provided by the bass guitar, so we will go to the bass guitar and send from sidechain 3. This moment we realize we need another one for dynamic EQ, but I have other, and we're going to use other for now. We will go to the bass guitar. We will find its key input, and its key input will be sidechain 5 other, and we will go to the drums, and we will send. We're just setting up our routing right now from other. And then just to tidy ourselves up, just to make sure, we're going to mute it, and we'll put it in pre-mode. Same for the one that we opened up, that we will open up. Let's get rid of this compressor, get rid of this send for now. This is already coming from sidechain other, and this is the bass over here. That's not the bass. Yeah, I'm going to keep saying that joke over and over again. That's our other, ready to go, muted. Now the one for drums. Drums responding to bass is going to come from sidechain 3 dynamic EQ, which we have right here. We're going to mute that, set that to pre, and go. We have them both here. We don't really have enough space to have them together the whole time, but we could do it for analysis sake. We're going to factory default these because, as you know, I was messing with it before. Factory default. This is kind of a double whammy because we're going to talk about sidechaining a dynamic EQ while utilizing this, I think, is a badass plugin from Waves, the F6. I like opening the one that has the RTA on it so we have an idea what's happening. So right now, on the left, I have the one for drums, and on the right, I have the one for bass. And all we're going to look at right now is what both instruments are doing. We're just going to look. We're not going to listen. I'm kidding. We are going to look and listen to what they're both doing. So remember, on the left is drums. On the right is bass. Now we can do what a lot of us have learned to do is grab something, move it around, see what we like, don't like. And that might be helpful. Same thing. Figure out who's doing what. Just sweep. We call this sweeping. That's definitely a thing. But right now, for me, I think just by going to the drums, and if we kind of pull on these and Q, since the drums aren't really doing much there anyway, so maybe around that 85 area, like I talked about, we'll mute the. So right there, that's favorable to the drums. So we don't want to lose that. So maybe this lower end, more low end. That actually has the drums punching out more. You could leave it there or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back to 0 gain, and we're going to apply a sidechain. So right now we are on band 2. We hit external. That means it's going to get the information from the bass. So we'll do this again from the beginning. Move this out of the way. Let's now get this active. That's at unity. Okay. We're going to put the EQ back on. This is the drum. This EQ is on the drums, receiving information from the bass. Right now, only on band 2. So this will dynamic EQ works much like a compressor. We will see if we want an immediate hit every time the bass hits, and how long we want to hold it for. There's our threshold when it'll start doing stuff. In the beginning, we'll be a little aggressive, and we'll go towards the negative side. And you see, it'll start dancing its way down. And if we want to really, every time that bass is playing, that frequency is going to disappear. Now, the cool thing is, if we feel we want a little more love where this kick really goes, we could do the opposite. So we take band 3, because that's the one I grabbed. We do external with that. We could do the same thing. We could set that. We could have it show up where it's living. But then we take our range and do the opposite. We go toward the plus side. And every time that bass hits, and tighten up the cue a little bit. Maybe clean that up. And maybe just figure out. So it's basically clutting, it's basically pulling out maybe some woofy frequency that the drum doesn't necessarily need when the bass is playing, and bringing in that kick where it's hit and the frequency maybe we want to feel. Now while that's happening, let me mute this compressor. Try to get our volumes somewhere. So basically, every time the bass plays, it's clearing out somewhere around 45. I'm sorry. Wrong one. We're doing number 2. Number 2. It's clearing out somewhere around 55. And we can mess with that too. We might say, like, maybe it needs to clear out. Let the bass hit. So in the meantime, if we look at the bass guitar, let's send signal now from here. So now we're going to send our sidechain information from the drums. It's hitting. It's at unity or 0. We'll roll back a little bit. So we could say to ourselves, this EQ on the right, this is for the bass. Well, if we know the drums is really favoring 96 is where we kind of ended up, we could immediately go to 3, we'll match it. We'll type in 96, and this is a starting point. Obviously we could just use our ears, but we'll type in 96. We'll bring in external sidechain information. We'll pull this bad boy down. We'll do a pretty quick attack because we want it to happen immediately. We don't want to hold it too long. And then we're going to do the negative 18. We've got to shape our cue a little bit. We don't want to take too much away from the bass. Just need a little bit. And keep going. Maybe Maybe it needs to be a little faster. Maybe it needs to. So every time that kick drum's hitting, we are pulling that frequency away. We are pulling the favorable 96 away from the bass. Now, while we were doing that, we also realized that we were pulling 61 away from our drums to make more room for the bass. It's a little back and forth thing. So let's take number 1 and type in 61. Take the external information, get a quick attack, don't let it hold on too long, get this thing kind of bumping, and we're going to push it. This is where we go on range, we go plus 18. Probably need to mess with the Q a little bit, whoever works. So let's mute them, let's bypass them. And that can help with some glue. And seeing what we did to this whole thing, let's put this compressor back on. Crazy, a little aggressive. So now we can lessen this a little bit. Bring this down, let's get some gain matching. I'm not, I mean, obviously we're doing very aggressive examples here.
Smile pretty for the camera. You can always take it with you. You'll see. It will only take a moment of your time. One day it may be all that we ever left of this. Guess it's got us for the flavor. You can never get no higher than that. Later on, you know it's savor. And we can see all of the things that we missed. I can't resist. The way that you shake it.
We messed with the side chains. We showed different ways to use them and how they could work together. Got a little deeper with the Waves F6 and how to utilize that. Again, with this particular dynamic EQ, the fact that you could choose which band is affected by sidechain information, which, mind you only get one sidechain choice input. So that's fine. But what's cool is the frequencies that come in also affect it. So if I sent the vocal to a low frequency, this doesn't even really respond to it because that's not what it's really there to mess with. The options are endless. So have fun with this, and I hope it works out for all the wildest sidechaining, compression, dynamic EQ, and gating needs. We'll come back and talk about some routing.